Today's episode is sponsored by Ellie, Ellii.
Ellie is one of the world's leading content libraries for English language teachers, with thousands of ready-made lessons and flashcards and hundreds of videos that you can use to complement your own curriculum or use as your main source of materials.
Ellie is run by a team of former English teachers, dedicated to creating content that engages your language learners.
If you're an independent teacher or paying for your materials out of pocket, we invite you to use our podcast's exclusive discount code Think-Aloud to save 15% off your first membership term. That's THINKALOUD.
And if you're an administrator looking to buy for your whole program, just reach out to the fine folks at Ellie to inquire about a 2-month free trial to test it out for your organization. And don't forget to mention who sent you, your friends at the Teacher Think-Aloud Podcast.
Head to ellie.com today. That's ELLII.com.
Hello, and welcome to the Teacher Think-Aloud Podcast, a podcast for reflective practice for teachers of English around the world. I'm your co-host, Shé.
And I'm Anna.
And today we are talking about teaching strategy. I feel like it's been a while, huh, Anna?
Yeah, talking about an instructional approach in isolation anyway. We've explored some fun topics lately, like how LLMs can support English language teaching and tech-enabled teacher reflection, but we're coming back around to pure strategy.
Back to basics.
Haha.
And speaking of, we hope you'll consider contributing to our upcoming Friends of the Podcast episode, slated to come out at the top of the new year.
Yeah, in this episode, we're asking you to reflect on your current teaching practice, highlight one area you'd like to focus on in your professional development, and identify one way you'll get started.
Super simple. Leave us a voice memo at bit.ly/backtobasics26.
Linked in the show notes, as always.
We really want to hear from you, listeners. Our Friends of the Podcast episode is one of our favorites each year because we get to feature so many voices from all over.
It's true. So back to the topic at hand. Today, we're exploring the lexical approach, which I'm sure many of our listeners have heard of.
Yes. It's seen a bit of a resurgence lately, hasn't it? And in part, that's thanks to today's guest, Erin. Let's meet her and break the ice.
I tried to keep this short, but it's really difficult. My name's Erin O'Byrne. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a teacher trainer. I'm an ELT teacher. I live in Ireland, but I'm from England. I live to help teachers get better at their job using common sense, easy to implement strategies to make your lives easier, because who's looking out for you?
That's a great elevator pitch right there. If you have listened to any of our previous episodes, you know that we like to throw a little icebreaker in there. So our icebreaker question for you today is, do you have a favorite English phrase or idiom that just delights you, either because of how it sounds or what it means?
That's a really tough one to be put on the spot with, to be honest.
Or right now, one that you love right
actually,
now.
I'll go with an Irishism, because they have so many fantastic phrases over here that are hilarious. But I do love notions. Notions is kind of like delusions of grandeur or ideas above your station. So, you know, what's she doing shopping in that expensive shop? Oh, the notions on her. That kind of thing.
Oh, interesting.
And I just love that one because with the accent and everything. Oh, the notions! Like, it's just such a brilliant phrase. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it. No, I've never heard that.
Yeah, neither have I. I mean, I guess I've never been to Ireland, so that would explain it.
You should come. Bring your umbrella.
Yes. Well, very familiar with rainy weather over here, too, in Seattle. Thank you, Erin.
I'll admit, I certainly have notions sometimes.
We're dreamers, but fairly grounded ones, I would say.
Yes. I love that neither of us had heard of notions used in this way. In the US, we'll use it as a synonym for idea or impression, but certainly not with any connotation of grandeur, as Erin shared.
Nope. Right. And this is a great example of why it's so fun and effective for cross-cultural communication to teach students idioms or expressions that have a figurative or non-literal meaning.
We asked our audience about teaching idioms to their students, and Heidi de Mello, who is currently working in Turkey, shared that she had a conversation with her students this week about idioms that are older words that have been repurposed.
That's right. And she used an online corpus to have her students look up how words have been used in the past. And if you're not familiar, listeners, a corpus, plural corpora, is a body of language material, written or spoken, that is stored digitally and helps us see how language is actually used.
And there's emphasis on the word used, right? Often in language learning, we have what's written in a textbook, but that doesn't always reflect how language is used by actual language users. So incorporating corpus linguistics or looking at the data sets to see how language is actually utilized in real life is important for teachers to see what to deliver to their students.
Absolutely. So our friend Heidi used the online corpus Google Ngram Books viewer and looked up word usage frequency from the 19th century until now. Her young B1 level students were shocked to learn that words like slay and extra were actually used quite frequently as early as the 1800s.
This is mind-boggling. I had no idea. For those of you listening who aren't familiar with the terms, slay means to do something really well, and extra is when something is perceived as a bit much. Now, I may be dating myself here offering up those definitions.
Oh, well, can you use them in context, please, Shé? I'll give you bonus points if you can get them both in one sentence.
Absolutely, I can. I am hip. Anna, you and I always feel a little extra when we're recording our cheesy audience questions, but it's pretty clear that we slayed this one because we got a bunch of audience engagement.
Slay. Yes, nice work. And it's true. We also heard from Lin Feng, CEO and founder of the Eduling app, who shared resources she created for her culture and idioms course on the app, highlighting idioms with the word task.
Let's have a little listen.
Hi, everyone. Let's learn the word task today because let's be honest, we all have too many of them. First, let's pronounce it together. Task. Task. The plural form, tasks. Tasks. When you're on task, you're totally focused doing what you're supposed to do. Example, I'm on task means I'm actually studying, not scrolling TikTok. But when you're off task, oops, you're watching those cat videos instead of writing your essay. Example, sorry, teacher, I get a little off task again.
I like how these examples highlight how to start with the word and teach various expressions with it rather than just one isolated expression. It's a great way to deepen their understanding of the word, and I like the embedded pronunciation practice for learners too.
Me too. And these are meaningful chunks of language that learners can integrate into their linguistic repertoire that actually serve them more than just appearing more fluent. I mean, I love to see teachers teaching It's Raining Cats and Dogs. I did it. You probably did it. But people don't really say that as much as students are told that they do, right?
Right.
So it's really only something that serves students in small talk. So we want more of that hard-hitting language like what Lynn has shared.
Absolutely. Thanks for contributing to the conversation, Lynn and Heidi. And listeners, you can find the links to Lynn's videos in the show notes. Let's get back to our conversation with Erin.
So, Erin, I've been doing some creeping of you professionally, of course, and in your work, specifically the Everything EFL podcast and Refresh Your Teaching, you often speak about empowering both learners and teachers. So I hope that you could tell us a little bit about how a lexical perspective on language learning supports both learner and teacher empowerment.
Maybe we should start with the bare bones of what the lexical approach is, just in case your listeners don't know. So I'm just going to break it down in its most basic form. It's a shift of mindset. It's a way of thinking about language, and it's the notion that language isn't made of individual words. It's made of chunks of language, structures. About 55 to 85% of all spoken discourse is made up of prefabricated structures and chunks. So if you think about it like that, it's a very different way to look at language, because I've seen it a million times and I used to do it, and I'm sure you guys have done it before. You write some vocabulary on the board and it tends to be individual words, or you've got the vocab section in your book and it's like 20 words. What are you supposed to do with that? So there's all kinds of chunks that can be looked at.
Let's pause here. Before
Yes.
we go any deeper, let's take a second to sit with the lexical approach. So we mentioned corpus a bit earlier, along with the idea of corpus analysis to guide our selection of lexical chunks or phrases that we share with our students.
Yes. And Michael Lewis's Lexical Approach, originally published back in the 90s, and what we're talking about today, falls under the umbrella term corpus-based teaching. And he takes the idea that the essential building blocks of language are words and word combinations, and that with vocabulary, you can do just about anything in a language.
Right. And he emphasized that lexical phrases or collocations, certain words that naturally collocate or go together, should be central in a language course. So phrases like "I'll be in touch" or "not so good" are useful patterns for learners to internalize, along with some predictable collocations like "I'll do my homework, do the laundry, do a great job."
But in terms of empowering students, so they process chunks faster, which I think is a big one. And you often find them repeating those chunks because they have more meaning, because you're giving them context as well. You are giving them real world language. The lexical approach is very much conversation driven. They recognize things, they notice things faster. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. We looked at this chunk, "There's something I've been meaning to tell you." It came up on one of those course book videos, but we drilled it and we made up little situations like, "There's something I've been meaning to tell you. I'm pregnant. Oh my God," that kind of thing. And then a few weeks later, one of my students came up to me excitedly and she said, "Oh, I was watching something on Netflix. And guess what I heard?" I said, "What?" She said, "There's something I've been meaning to tell you." And that's so much more powerful than like a word, because, when you explore the context and stuff like that, there's so much more meaning attached to it. For teachers, it can cut down your prep time. You become more selective of what you teach. You stop relying on maybe giving them everything, because we tend to deliver content rather than leaving space for what students produce and then working with that, which is another big part of the lexical approach. It's called emergent language. So we often want students to deliver like a prescribed utterance, like, "I've been there before. Have you?" Or "Have you ever swum in the sea?" Which is fine. But how about just letting it a bit loose, seeing what the students produce, and then seeing how you can elevate the language, giving them reformulated chunks and stuff like that. So it's a big topic, but it can empower students by giving them better language, giving them a voice if you give them some space. And it empowers teachers by, like I said, cutting down the prep time, which I think is massive because so many teachers suffer from burnout. I also think with the emergent language aspect that it can make lessons more exciting and spontaneous. And if you're giving students space, that means you're giving yourself more space. And at the end of the day, teachers are very creative creatures, but we often get very bogged down with, the planning and all the stress of the job. So when you're in the moment and you've got space to be in the moment with your students, that's when your creativity kicks in and you're like, "Oh my God, I've just thought of a really good little activity. Let's do this." And you go with it. And it's just a much better way of teaching.
I love that idea of learning it loose and just sort of going with the flow of how the language is really guiding you along, how you might actually use the language. I also want to point out that when you introduced your idiom earlier, notions, I could not picture how I would ever use that term in the Irish way that you were pointing out, but that the second you used it in a sentence, it really helped. And I actually understood what you meant, right? What that means in context. So learning it as chunks makes so much sense. And I love that emphasis. It's so easy to kind of introduce idioms and language chunks as these fixed different assets we have in a language, but they do move, right? So learning it loose kind of allows for that flexibility and creativity in learning and producing language. I love that.
Yeah. And it allows things to pop up. So you're not going, "Oh, let's do 10 idioms today." Something popped up. You can go, "Oh, like today, somebody in my class said about, what did they say? I can't remember what it was, but I reformulated to thinking on your feet." That's what they meant to say.
Mhm.
And it's like, we didn't do an idioms lesson. It popped up and we'll reuse that again in a future lesson, but we've just learned a really useful idiom, but in a very meaningful way. And students are more likely to remember it because it came from them rather than from you, which
Mhm.
again is another mindset shift that I think a lot of teachers really need to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I love this emphasis on embracing the teachable moments, having the language come from the learners. And it makes me think a little bit of the dogme approach over the last, I'd say 5 years or so.
Mhm.
I've been seeing a lot about it. But this idea of really just embracing the interactions that are happening in your classroom rather than entering and being really formulaic and sort of prescriptive in how you're exploring language with your students.
Yeah, and it's boring. And it gets boring for the teacher as well. And the dogme thing, that's all emergent language and it's all very much connected. With that kind of way of teaching, you can create space in your lesson plan for those teachable moments. And that's what's missing a lot. You plan down to the last minute. We've all done it. But if you plan and you're like, well, I'll plan an hour instead of an hour and 10 or an hour and 15, and let's just see what happens. And just that little bit of space makes a lot of difference because you can go deep on certain things that your students have questions on instead of just sort of going, yeah, here's the answer. Okay, let's move on because I've got a photocopied activity that I've printed out and prepared, so I have to use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can get so attached to our lesson plans for sure.
Yeah.
So how did you come to embrace this view in your own practice? Give us a little maybe origin story of thinking of the lexical approach, meaningful chunks and
Okay.
grammar vocabulary as a unit.
I'll begin with a chunk that it's probably about 5 years old now. It all started in lockdown. Just bored, I thought now's the time to read and improve myself because I was getting bored with like you called it the formulaic way of teaching. I was getting bored with it. So I started watching some videos from Hugh Deller. I don't know if you know Hugh Deller. He's massive in the lexical approach world. And then I read his book and I watched loads of YouTube videos and I read more books. And with anything in teaching, you grab onto something you like and you just kind of go with it and you experiment and see what happens. And I've just sort of developed things over the years that suit me and my style. Everybody's different, I just find that it makes sense to me. And that's the thing. It just makes sense in every way possible for me. So I always introduce my students to it. They know what a chunk is. They often say, oh, there's a chunk, teacher. I'm like, yes, that's brilliant. I'm so happy you said that. And I just think it's really important to have this shift of mindset. And it was like, do you know what it was like? Have you ever seen the original Matrix, where at the end, Keanu Reeves actually sees the Matrix and he realizes what it's all about? That's exactly what it's like when you start seeing a text or a conversation in sort of chunk form. It's like this kind of veil lifts and everything suddenly becomes clear.
Yeah, I love that your students, they start recognizing, oh, that's a chunk. Oh, that's a chunk. You start seeing everything in chunks, but then everything starts to come together, all of these puzzle pieces. And I do love that Matrix reference, right? It's like we're actually having the wool pulled off of our eyes.
Yeah.
That is not the correct idiom, speaking of idioms and chunks, but
We'll move on.
we'll move on.
As Erin's describing this, I can't help but think so many of us were trained to teach one word at a time, like we were filling up vocabulary lists.
Exactly. And yet language doesn't really work that way, does it? It's built from chunks, phrases, patterns that carry meaning together.
And that matrix moment she describes, I've had that. I mean, suddenly you're walking around and you're seeing and hearing chunks everywhere. That sounds pretty gross. You're seeing chunks, you're hearing chunks, but you get the point. You're seeing these lexical chunks everywhere, billboards, Netflix shows, even your own text. So you realize how patterned real communication is.
I think that kind of awareness changes not only what we teach, but how we notice language ourselves.
Exactly. Once you see it, you can't teach the same way again.
Let's get into some ways to incorporate this mindset into our teaching.
Erin, I hear you mention students noticing these chunks. So I'd love if you could share some practical strategies that you use to help students both notice and retain these lexical chunks within these authentic language contexts that you're creating, or maybe that they're living in.
Sure. I think one really simple thing you can do, and I did it with my B2 class the other day, is we had a short text. I would normally recommend using dialogues, audio transcripts, because like I said, the lexical approach is conversation driven, but we just used a little text because it had loads of nice business collocations and chunks in it. And we went through what a chunk was. Some of them already knew, some of them were new students, so they didn't. Got them in pairs, and they just had to highlight all of the chunks in the text. And that's it. And you can start by, if your students are completely unfamiliar with it, you can go through what chunks are, and then you can just take a paragraph of a transcript and call out the chunks so they get an idea. And then do that a few times. You call out the chunks for them, and then you can have a little look. And then eventually you kind of hand over the autonomy to them and tell them, we don't expect you to get all of them, but just try and all of that. And then it just hands over the autonomy. What was the question again?
Yeah, how do you get them to notice and then retain the lexical chunks? That retention is the second piece.
It's noticing, that was the word that went bing in my mind, because there is a concept called noticing in the lexical approach. It's not always about chunks, though. It's more about grammar. So as you know, some grammar's really, really difficult, like the third person S, the present bloody perfect, ing verbs. So what you can do is, again, take an audio transcript or a dialogue, and you can just ask them something like, highlight all the ing verbs. Why are they ing? You got 4 options. If they're high level, just let them at it. If they're lower level, put the options on the board. Subject of the sentence. It follows a particular verb pattern. It follows a preposition. And I'm sure there's one more, but present continuous tense. Or, highlight all of the actions that happened before now. Highlight all of the verbs with an S on the end, or all the words with an S. Are they plural nouns or are they third person verbs? So that's noticing in the lexical sense.
What I love about this approach is how it trains learners to notice patterns, not just memorize words. And Erin makes an important point about autonomy, too. How much space do we give students to notice things for themselves?
Yeah, it shifts the power dynamic, right? The teacher isn't the only one who can spot useful language anymore. And that's so empowering because autonomy starts with awareness.
Right. And this really helps in making language learning feel achievable, I think, not abstract. It's a reminder that the goal isn't to just teach language, but to teach how to learn a language effectively.
And the other part was about recycling them.
Retention. But yes, first thing that comes to my mind is recycling, right?
Yeah. I think, again, sticking to dialogues and audios, I'm going to throw a little question back to you ladies, actually. Think about, I'm a big fan of reusing materials. Again, less prep for you, familiarity with the students. Why on earth are we not doing it more? How would you reuse an audio transcript or a dialogue?
How would you reuse it? So you've already used it once in class.
And then you've done a bit of chunking or a bit of noticing. And then you want students to maybe, go back and recall a few chunks. What could you do with that audio transcript?
Well, honestly, at that point, I'm just thinking like, okay, we are doing a lot of receptive knowledge. We're noticing where does the productive knowledge come into things? So at that point, I would be thinking of not necessarily using that transcript itself, but taking it to the productive level. So having them recreate the dialogue in their own context, change the context, have them recreate it, rewrite it, or do it orally, right? So that's where my mind is going, and maybe asking them, depending on how much direction they need, depending on level, all sorts of things, asking them, okay, can you try to use at least one of these chunks that we learned, that we noticed in this passage, in that exercise, in creating their own version of that? Does that qualify as reusing that? Less prep? Yeah.
There's no right or wrong answer here, by the way. It's literally, your imagination is the limit.
Yeah, I was thinking about productive pieces of language as well. And I wonder if we could ask the students to think about like equivalent sayings or similar lexical chunks that they've experienced already that might fit into this dialogue. Maybe they could be asked to go back a little bit further, in previous week's lessons and sort of resurface language that might also fit in that dialogue. That's just off the top of my head there.
Great. Yeah. Production is great, but I am a big fan of that receptive stage because I also think a lot of that is missing. We often go to, here's a text, here are the rules, do a gap fill, now produce. And your brain just doesn't work like that. So I think the more receptive exercises you can do, the better. So maybe even before those ideas, you can have another receptive stage where you just blank out the chunks, put a word pool on the board and go fill in the gaps. Really easy, right? Again, I'm a big fan of not making it complicated for anybody. And then possibly taking those chunks and creating questions with them. We talked about thinking on your feet. Let's imagine that's in the transcript, right? When was the last time you had to think on your feet? What happened? Again, so you're giving them the language in the form of a question, but they're connecting it to their experiential memories, which is very powerful because we learn languages by forming connections, not just producing it. You know, it's more meaningful that way. And then once you've sort of covered that once or twice, maybe the language has been processed a little bit more and they'll be more able to use it in a productive way.
Love that. Yeah. And I think that it also gives the students a chance to actually interact with these lexical chunks as they appear in the wild, right? They're being asked these questions when they're maybe at, a networking event, or they're hanging out with new friends who are speakers of the target language. So I love that. And I could also see the students having to maybe manipulate the chunks themselves and say, let's move this from first person to third person, or let's use a different tense or time for this. So it's truly really fertile ground using this approach. I love it. Thanks, Erin, for that question. That's fun. We don't get a lot of questions ourselves.
And so happy that you kind of paused and said, well, let's slow down before we get into full production, because you're right. There really needs to be a bit more time for processing before someone can just start rolling off all of these chunks naturally in their own speech. So I do appreciate that kind of slow down and thinking about all of the different contexts in which they can be exposed to something, right? There's some language acquisition studies that shows that there's a certain number of times that someone needs to be exposed to a word or to a chunk, a lexical chunk, before they actually incorporate that into their lexicon. So yeah, I think that that's a really great point. We need to slow down and modify the receptive portion of that before we can get into full on independent production.
This is such a good point, how we rush students into speaking before they've really absorbed what they're hearing.
So true. We equate output with progress, but sometimes progress looks quiet,
Absolutely. And fluency isn't just about speed, right? It's about depth of knowledge.
And slowing down can actually move students forward faster in the long run. In this way, students are internalizing chunks and not having to create sentences word by word. There's just more language available to them, and this often results in increased automaticity in speaking, but also in recognizing lexical chunks in language they're receiving, right? Just a few of the benefits of the lexical approach.
It's such a simple idea, but I think it takes real discipline as a teacher to do less and let students notice more. I would add that in addition to smoother, more idiomatic speech, there's also a lightened mental load for the students, right? They're working a bit less when they aren't parsing through their entire lexicon for the right word. And this can really aid the confidence of learners who are newer to the language and those shy students too.
So you're talking about your classroom as an English language teacher, but you also, in your introduction, you said you are a teacher trainer as well. So when working with teachers who haven't really encountered this approach before, who haven't really thought about it, how do you guide them to the shift from teaching rules to teaching real language, to introducing the lexical approach into their classrooms?
Well, first of all, everything's a process and you do have to find your own way. No one size fits all in teaching and learning, but I give them very practical activities and tasks that they can implement literally the next day. And I think that's the best way of doing it. And I ask questions like, if a student produces something, like, I don't have enough money, right? Maybe they're a B2 level. Ask yourself, how would I say this? Or when I eat peanuts, my skin goes red, my face gets big. How would I say that? I'm allergic. So always ask yourself that. Explore the language as well. And ask yourself, is this really useful? I say this all the time, but if you go and you search for the passive, right, online and some example sentences, you'll get things like this. The turkey was eaten by the dog. The holiday will always be remembered by me. And the file has been moved.
Ugh, are we still teaching like that? Oof. Ugh.
Well, if you go online, there are your examples. So ask yourself, especially with grammar, is this useful? Like, I have baked a cake. Have you? I mean, I don't know if I've ever said that in my life, but I know I've said, I've never been here before, or I've just arrived, or she's just arrived. So think about the examples that you're providing. And if the textbook isn't good enough, provide your own examples. And it doesn't take that long. You brainstorm, and you brainstorm really common institutionalized phrases, and you use that kind of language. So that, I think, is one of the most important things. What else? I've had a non-native speaker say to me before, oh, but you're a native speaker, you know all these things. And I'm like, so do you. All you have to do is really just think, right? What are the things I use, for example, with the present perfect in an everyday sense? Is it I've baked a cake? No. All right, let's think of something else. It's not that hard if you just think about it. And then you can always use like dictionaries and websites to help you as well. Have a look on, one thing I say is look on 3 or 4 grammar websites, look at the examples and ask yourself, have I said that before? Is that common? Have I heard that a million times? Yes, right, okay, that's a good example to use. So just sort of using your common sense, I think, is a really good tip.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm hoping that textbooks are starting to shift in this direction as well. I'm still holding on to books from ages ago and use them as reference, but I do hope that shift is slowly happening. And I think, common sense first really makes a lot of sense for deciding what to actually put emphasis on. So I think that's a really great piece of advice for teachers who are just starting to think about this. And there are so many sources out there to find alternatives now. You don't always have to rack your brains for hours to find the perfect example of how you would say it in this one specific situation. I mean, yes, the more experience you have, the easier those will come to you. But there are so many resources out there and so much digital content that we have access to. Why not pull that into our classes?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate the focus to move from rules to real language. We spend so much time telling students what's correct when we could be showing them what's natural.
Right, whatever correct means.
Yeah.
And when we model that shift, students start learning through engaging in authentic dialogue rather than just learning via rule-focused lectures.
And it doesn't have to be complicated. We've mentioned noticing a couple times. After reading or listening, you could have your students highlight or underline useful phrases, expressions, or sentence frames. Have them talk with a buddy and share what they underlined and why. Have the students compare their notes. What did they notice that their friend didn't, perhaps?
Yeah, simple and targeted to build the habit of noticing. We can also think about how we're recycling material, as Erin encouraged us to do. Pulling from the dialogues we've mentioned, remove a few common expressions or whatever you're working on in class and see how students might be able to fill in the missing chunks.
Yeah. I love this idea of creating closed dialogues to see what students can pull from their lexicons. I think that's an important consideration. We're working with multilingual individuals who have these vast resource banks in more than one language. This is a really good way to honor their funds of knowledge and build their confidence too.
And you could work on more productive elements of the language too, by having the students participate in role plays and express their opinions using common phrases like, I can see where you're coming from, but, or if I were you.
And I guess lastly, one idea to address collocations might be having 2 columns, one with verbs and one with nouns, and asking students to try to form collocations like make a mistake, take a break, etc.
Save time. Yeah,
exactly.
On and on. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note here that teaching collocations explicitly is critical because sometimes in English we have collocations that directly conflict with similar phrases in students' other languages.
There's a lot to it, but fortunately we have another episode all about teaching vocabulary.
That's right. Check out episode 12, Words, Words, Words. Dumb title. Great content, I promise.
Yeah, fortunately, I think we've gotten better at naming our episodes since then. Maybe. But let's hear what else Erin has on offer for teachers looking to bring the lexical approach into their practice more intentionally.
Well, you've both set me up really wonderfully for this last question because you've used the word sense and, the phrase, does it make sense? So That's sort of a big piece of what you do, Erin, right? Is, this no nonsense lexical toolkit. Tell us about that, what it is, why did you create it, who's it for, the whole thing.
Okay, the No Nonsense Lexical Toolkit is a 4-week course, and it's born from a passion to help teachers and an absolute belief that the lexical approach works. We learn about vocabulary, grammar, emergent language, and then we have just sort of a workshop and a Q&A where we just lesson plan jam and, get unstuck on the last few things. I got really good feedback on my last course. I can't wait for the official testimonials because I know they're going to be great. But it is no nonsense. I just give you the facts. We do really practical tasks, and it's literally the stuff you do in that session you can implement the very next day, as long as you're willing just to be accountable and put in the work.
Wow. That's exciting. And can you just tell me a little bit more of some of the nuts and bolts of that? How long is it? How do people sign up?
Sure. I have a waiting list
Mm-hmm.
that people can sign up for, so I can give you the link. I also have a little freebie video that tells you a little bit about the lexical approach and its benefits, and then you can be added to my email list from there and then get insights into the waiting list and everything like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's 4 weeks, and there's also a WhatsApp group, so you get support all the way through and also after, which has actually proven to be really, really useful and really nice because you build a bit of community there as well. You support each other. So it's not just like, hey, Erin, how do I do this? Everybody chips in and gives their opinion or suggestions, which is just amazing. And with all teacher training, it shouldn't just be a teacher talking. It should be workshoppy. It should be task-based. It should have everybody collaborating and coming up with their own ideas as well. So there's sort of time and space for that as well.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing a little bit more about that. That was our last official question. So I just want to open the floor to anything else you want to share about just the lexical approach in general, about your own work.
My own work, I've had a podcast called Everything EFL for a very long time now, which is kind of my passion project. There's lots and lots of episodes in the back catalogue. I regularly post on LinkedIn and Instagram. I've got a Breathe Easy Teacher newsletter, which is weekly tips, but also support and teacher love as well, because teachers do need to know there's somebody out there that's there to support. And I think a lot of people don't realize how tough teaching can be. And even in a crowded staff room, it can still be quite lonely, especially if you get burnt out and overwhelmed, which a lot of us do, So that's why I'm so passionate about helping teachers as well. I know how tough it can be, and I know how difficult and lonely it can be sometimes. And again, with regards to the lexical approach, it just makes sense.
I love that Erin's work doesn't stop at methodology. It's about community building too, because supporting learners starts with supporting teachers.
Listeners, we hope this episode sheds some light on an approach that can be empowering both for your learners and help simplify, even if just a little, your own practice.
Before we go, a reflective moment for you. We want to know how you're using the lexical approach in your own classroom. How do you highlight meaningful phrases for your students that they can actually use?
If you found this episode helpful or inspiring, please share it with a friend or colleague and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on your platform of choice, and we hope you'll consider contributing to our upcoming Friends of the Podcast episode. It's simple, I promise. Leave us a voice memo at bit.ly/backtobasics26.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Teacher Think-Aloud podcast. And until next time, friends, happy teaching.
And happy reflecting.